When Natasha's father is dying and she's drowning in medical bills, billionaire Jonathan Blackwater appears with an impossible offer. Marry him for 1 year to save her father's life. But this isn't a fairy tale, it's a cold business transaction. With a man who treats love like a spreadsheet, some stories make your heart race and your mind spin. This is one of them. Secrets, betrayal, and a love that could either conquer all or shatter completely. Where are you watching from? Like, subscribe, and turn on the bell for every shocking chapter. Let's begin. Asterisk, the fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital hummed with a merciless persistence that matched the rhythm of the life support machine beside Richard Winter's bed. Natasha pressed her palm against the cold window, watching rain cascade down the glass in rivulets that blurred the city lights below. Her reflection stared back, hollow-eyed and haunted, a woman who had aged years in the span of weeks. Winters. Dr. Chen's voice cut through the mechanical symphony of beeping monitors. We need to discuss your father's treatment options. Natasha turned from the window, her worn jeans and paint-stained sweater a stark contrast to the sterile white room. How much time does he have without the experimental therapy? 2 weeks? Maybe 3. The doctor's words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of devastation that spread through her chest. The treatment in Switzerland could extend his life significantly, but the cost, $300,000, had been burned into her memory, a figure so impossibly large it felt fictional. Her small art studio in the warehouse district barely covered rent and groceries. The medical bills already towered like a mountain she could never climb. Her phone buzzed against her hip. Another collection notice. Another reminder that time was a luxury she couldn't afford. 3 days later, Natasha found herself in Aurelius, the kind of restaurant where a single meal cost more than she made. In a month, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in pristine white linen, while servers moved with ballet-like precision between wealthy diners who spoke in hushed tones about million-dollar deals. She didn't belong here. Everything from her thrift store dress to her nervous energy screamed outsider Miss Winters. The voice was velvet over steel, cultured and commanding. Jonathan Blackwater stood beside her table like a figure stepped from the pages of a business magazine. His charcoal suit fit him with the precision of armor, his dark hair swept back without a single strand daring to rebel. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Steel gray and utterly unreadable, they seemed to catalog every detail of her appearance, her posture, her desperation. Mr. Blackwater. She half rose from her chair, uncertain of the protocol when meeting a man worth more than entire city blocks. I still don't understand why you wanted to see me. He settled into the chair across from her with fluid grace, gesturing for her to sit. Your father was my 5th-grade teacher. The words hit her like a physical blow. She searched his face for any trace of the boy her father might have taught, but found only marble perfection. He changed my life, Jonathan continued, his voice betraying nothing. When other teachers saw a problem child from the wrong side of town, Richard Winters saw potential. He'd stayed after school to tutor me. He made sure I had books to read, food when I needed it. He's the reason I'm sitting here today. Natasha felt tears prick her eyes. It sounded exactly like something her father would do. It's incredibly generous. But I can't accept charity. Good. Jonathan's lips curved in what might have been a smile on anyone else, but looked predatory on him, because I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a business arrangement. The waiter appeared with wine that probably cost more than Natasha's monthly groceries. She waited until they were alone again, her pulse thundering in her throat. What kind of arrangement? Jonathan leaned back, studying her with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. I need a wife. The restaurant sounds faded to white. Noise. Natasha was certain she'd misheard him over the classical music and clinking silverware. Excuse me? My board believes a married man appears more stable, more trustworthy to investors and shareholders. They've been pressuring me to settle. Down for the better part of 2 years? I've decided they're right. Natasha stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. You're serious. Deadly serious. 1 year of marriage. You'll live in my penthouse, attend necessary social functions, play the role of devoted wife. For the cameras and board members, In return, your father receives the best medical care available anywhere in the world. All expenses paid. This is insane. Her voice cracked. You could marry anyone. You could models, socialites, women who actually want to be married to a billionaire. Those women want love, romance, forever. His expression remained carved from stone. I can't give them that. What I'm offering you is honest. A transaction between two adults who understand exactly what they're getting. And what makes you think I don't want love? For the first time, something flickered behind his gray eyes. Something almost human. Because right now, you want your father to live more than you want anything else in the world. The truth of his words struck her like a physical blow. He was right. She would sell her soul to save the man who had raised her alone after her. Mother's death, who had worked 3 jobs to put her through art school, who had never once made her feel like a burden. I need to think about it. Jonathan placed a business card on the white tablecloth between them. You have 24 hours. After that, I'll find another solution to my problem. Natasha picked up the card with trembling fingers. The heavy paper stock felt expensive, substantial, like everything else in Jonathan Blackwater's world. 1 year, she whispered. 1 year, and then we both get what we need. As she walked out of Aurelius into the rain-soaked night, Natasha wondered if she was about to save her father's life or sell her own soul to the devil. The law office smelled of leather and old money, its mahogany walls lined with diplomas and certificates that proclaimed the partnership's prestigious pedigree. Natasha sat in a chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent, staring at the contract that would reshape her entire existence. 27 pages of legal language that essentially boiled down to 1 year of her life in exchange for her father's survival. The terms are quite straightforward. Jonathan's lawyer, silver-haired man named Harrison Wells, explained in the kind of voice that charged by the syllable. Public appearances as required, separate living quarters within Mr. Blackwater's residence, and complete discretion regarding the nature of the arrangement. Natasha's eyes scanned the dense paragraphs, catching phrases that made her stomach twist. Marital duties as deemed appropriate for public consumption, behavior befitting a spouse of Mr. Blackwater's social standing, termination clauses, subject to breach of conduct. What does marital duties mean exactly? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan, who had been silent since they'd entered the office, finally spoke. Hand-holding at public events. A kiss for the photographers. Nothing more intimate than what you'd see in a movie rated for general audiences. The clinical way he described it made her skin crawl and her heart race simultaneously. Up to find him watching her with those unreadable gray eyes. And if I can't do this? If I'm not good enough to play the part? Something shifted in his expression, so subtle, she might have imagined it. You're stronger than you think, Natasha. You'll adapt. It was the first time he'd used her first name. The sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Wells cleared his throat. There's also the matter of your allowance. $50,000 per month for personal expenses, plus unlimited access to stylists, trainers, and etiquette coaches as needed. $50,000. It's more money than she'd ever seen, and it was just her allowance. The scope of Jonathan's wealth hit her like a physical force. I also want something added to the contract, she said suddenly, surprising herself with her boldness. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. Oh, if my father dies during this year, the contract is void, so I won't be able to play happy wife if he's gone. Done. Jonathan nodded to Wells, who made a note in the margins. Anything else? Natasha stared at the signature line, the pen heavy in her hand. Once she signed this, there would be no going back. No more late nights in her cluttered studio. No more quiet dinners with just her and her father when he was well enough. No more simple life where her biggest worry was making rent, but her father would live. The experimental treatment would give him years instead of weeks. There's one more thing, Jonathan said as she lifted the pen. My assistant Grace will help you transition into your new life. Wardrobe, social etiquette, anything you need to. Fit into my world. And what if your world doesn't want me in it? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, and for a moment she caught a scent that was purely him, expensive cologne mixed with something else. something warm and masculine that made her pulse quicken. Then we'll make it want you. Natasha signed her name with handwriting that betrayed none of the earthquake happening inside her chest. The ink was barely dry when Wells began gathering the documents, his movements efficient and final. "Congratulations," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're now Mrs. Jonathan Blackwater." The words hit her like a slap. Mrs. Jonathan Blackwater. A name that belonged to someone else, someone confident and polished and worthy of standing beside a man who owned half the city. "The wedding will be small," Jonathan said as they walked toward his car, a sleek black Mercedes that probably cost more than most people's houses. "City Hall, immediate family only. We can't afford to wait for an elaborate ceremony. My father can't travel yet. I'll arrange for a video call so he can witness the ceremony. It's important that this appears genuine from the start." Everything was logistics with him, Natasha realized. Even their fake wedding was just another business meeting to be scheduled and executed. The drive to her apartment was silent, except for the soft purr of the Mercedes engine. Jonathan stared out the window at the city passing by, his profile sharp. As cut glass against the tinted windows, "You can take whatever you want from your place," he said finally. "Grace will handle moving your belongings to the penthouse. All of them, within reason." The penthouse isn't a storage unit. Natasha thought of her canvases, her easel, the dozens of half-finished paintings that covered every surface of her small studio apartment. They were her life, her identity, everything that made her who she was. "What about my art?" To look at her directly for the first time since leaving the lawyer's office. "What about it? I need to paint. It's not a hobby for me. It's essential," he finished, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "I understand. We'll convert one of the spare rooms into a studio." The unexpected kindness in his offer caught her off guard. She'd been prepared for him to dismiss her art as frivolous the way everyone else in her life eventually did. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Jonathan said, as the Mercedes pulled up to her building. "In 3 days, you'll be married to a man you barely know, living in a world that will judge your every move. You might come to hate me before this is over." Natasha looked at him, really looked at him, trying to see past the perfect facade to the man underneath. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of vulnerability that disappeared so quickly she might have imagined it. "I might," she agreed quietly. "But my father will be alive to see it." As she climbed the stairs to her apartment for what might be the last time, Natasha wondered which of them was making the bigger sacrifice. The penthouse was a monument to wealth and isolation. Floored Tuesling windows offered a commanding view of the city, but the space felt more like a museum than a home. Everything was perfect, sterile, untouchable. Even the air seemed expensive. Natasha stood in the center of the living room, her single suitcase looking pathetic against the backdrop of Italian leather furniture and abstract art that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Your room is down the hall," Jonathan said, his voice echoing off the marble floors. "Grace will show you around and help you get settled." Grace turned out to be a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the organizational skills of a military general. She moved through the penthouse with practiced efficiency, showing Natasha the kitchen she'd never use, the gym she'd be too intimidated to enter, and the library that took her breath away. "Mr. Blackwater reads voraciously," Grace explained, as Natasha ran her fingers along the spines of leather-bound classics. "He has particular fondness for poetry, though he'd never admit it." The revelation surprised her. Jonathan Blackwater reading poetry felt like discovering a wolf who secretly wrote love songs. Her bedroom was larger than her entire old apartment, with a walk-in closet that Grace had already filled with clothes in her exact size. Designer dresses, shoes that cost more than her monthly grocery budget, lingerie that made her blush just looking at it. "How did you know my measurements?" Natasha asked, holding up a silk blouse that felt like liquid in her hands. Grace smiled. "Mr. Blackwater is very observant. He estimated your size from your meeting at the restaurant." The thought of Jonathan studying her body closely enough to guess her measurements sent heat rushing through her veins. She pushed the feeling away, reminding herself this was just another business transaction to him. "The wedding is tomorrow. At 2, Grace continued. "I've arranged for hair and makeup to come here at 10. The dress is hanging in your closet." "Wedding dress?" the words still felt surreal. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Jonathan Blackwater, at least on paper. That night, Natasha couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft, the silence too complete, the weight of her decision too heavy. She found herself wandering the penthouse in her pajamas, drawn to the library like a moth to flame. She pulled a volume of Pablo Neruda from the shelf and settled into one of the leather chairs. Seeking comfort in familiar words about love and loss, the poetry felt like a bridge between her old life and this strange new existence. Having trouble sleeping, Natasha nearly dropped the book. Jonathan stood in the doorway, looking younger without his perfectly tailored suit. His hair was mussed, his white t-shirt casual in a way that made him seem almost human. "The bed is too quiet," she admitted. "I'm used to city noise, sirens. In traffic, this place is like a tomb." Jonathan moved into the library, and she caught a glimpse of something she'd never seen before. Exhaustion. The kind that came from carrying weight no one else could see. "I'm sorry if I woke you," she said. "You didn't. Don't sleep much." He gestured at the book in her lap. "Good choice." Neruda understood that love and pain are often the same thing. The observation was so unexpected, so genuinely human, that Natasha felt something shift between them. "You really do read poetry," among other things you wouldn't expect from a heartless corporate monster. There was humor in his voice, dry and self-aware. For a moment, the mask slipped, and she saw the man beneath the billionaire facade. "I never called you heartless, you thought it." His gray eyes met hers directly. Everyone does. "Maybe they're wrong." Jonathan was quiet for so long that Natasha thought he might not respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "No, they're not." The pain in those 3 words was so raw, so genuine, that Natasha felt her heart crack open. This wasn't the cold, calculating businessman who had offered her a contract. This was someone who had been hurt so deeply that he'd forgotten how to trust in anything but money and power. "What happened to you?" The question slipped out before she could stop herself. Jonathan's walls slammed back up so quickly she could almost hear them. "Nothing that concerns our arrangement." But it was too late. He'd seen behind the mask, even if only for a moment. The Jonathan Blackwater, who read poetry and carried scars he wouldn't name, was far more dangerous to her heart than the cold stranger who'd offered her a business deal. The wedding ceremony was exactly as clinical as Natasha had expected. City Hall, 2 witnesses who were clearly Jonathan's employees, and an officiant who performed the ceremony with all the passion of someone reading a grocery list. Natasha wore a simple cream-colored dress that Grace had chosen, elegant without being too bridal. Jonathan looked devastating in his dark suit, every inch the successful businessman marrying his love match, except his eyes remained as cold as winter steel, even when he slipped the wedding band onto her finger. "You may kiss the bride." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Jonathan's hands were warm as they framed her face, his touch gentler than she'd expected. When his lips met hers, the kiss was soft, appropriate for the witnesses, and the camera Grace held to document their special day. But for just a moment, Natasha felt something flicker between them, a spark of something real beneath the pretense. When they broke apart, Jonathan's eyes were unreadable again. "Congratulations, Mrs. Blackwater," he said, his voice giving nothing. "Away, Mrs. Blackwater." The name still felt like it belonged to someone else. That evening, Jonathan disappeared into his study with barely a word, leaving Natasha alone in the penthouse that was supposed to be her home now. She called her father to tell him about the wedding, watching his face light up on the video call from his hospital bed. "He seems like a good man, sweetheart," Richard said, though the pain medication made his words slightly slurred. "Anyone who would do this for someone he barely knows has a good heart, even if he doesn't show it." If only it were that simple, Natasha thought. If only this were a real marriage to a man who might actually love her someday, instead of a business arrangement, with someone who saw her as a convenient solution to a boardroom problem. But as she hung up the phone and prepared for her first night as Mrs. Jonathan Blackwater, Natasha couldn't shake the memory of those few moments in the library when she'd seen the real man behind the mask. And despite everything, she found herself wanting to see him again. 3 months into their arrangement, Natasha had almost convinced herself that normal was possible. The penthouse felt less like a museum and more like a very expensive prison she'd grown accustomed to. Her new studio was filled with canvases that captured her complicated emotions in bold strokes and muted colors. Her father was responding well to treatment, his doctors cautiously optimistic, and Jonathan was becoming harder to ignore. She'd learned his patterns. Coffee at 5:30 every morning, black and scalding. He read 3 newspapers with breakfast, his expression growing more shuttered with each headline. He worked until well past midnight most nights, the glow from his study casting long shadows down the hallway, but there were moments when the facade cracked. When he asked about her father's progress and listened with genuine concern, when he found her crying over a particularly difficult canvas and brought her tea without a word, when he caught her humming while she painted and almost smiled before remembering himself. Their public appearances had become less awkward, more natural. The photographers loved them, the city's most romantic power couple, one magazine had gushed after a charity gala, where they'd danced together with something approaching chemistry. The memory of that dance still haunted her dreams. "The Hartwell Foundation dinner is Thursday," Jonathan said over breakfast, not looking up from his newspaper. "It's important that we make a good impression. Senator Morrison will be there, along with several potential investors." Natasha nodded, used to these commands disguised as information. She'd become skilled at playing the devoted wife, smiling at his side while he worked the room with ruthless precision. "I'll wear the blue dress, the one Grace picked out. Actually, I had something else made for you." Jonathan folded his paper with military precision. "It should arrive this afternoon." The casual way he spent money on her still took her breath away. A custom dress for one evening, probably costing more than she used to make in 6 months. "You don't have to keep buying me things, Jonathan. I'm not going anywhere." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than she'd intended. For the contract, she meant. She wasn't going anywhere because of the contract, so why did it feel like a promise of something else entirely? That afternoon, a team of people descended on the penthouse like a fashion army. Hair, makeup, the dress designer for final alterations. Natasha stood in her bedroom like a doll being prepared for display while hands fussed and adjusted and perfected. The dress was stunning. Deep emerald silk that hugged her curves and made her eyes look like jewels. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone who belonged in Jonathan's world, someone worthy of being Mrs. Blackwater. Grace, said softly, adjusting the diamond necklace that had appeared with the dress. "Mr. Blackwater will be very proud." Pride, such a complicated word when it came to their arrangement. The Hartwell Foundation dinner was held at the city's most exclusive hotel, its ballroom glittering with crystal and draped in white silk. Natasha had learned to navigate these events, to smile and make small talk and pretend her heart didn't race every time Jonathan's hand touched her back. "Senator Morrison, I'd like you to meet my wife, Natasha." Jonathan's voice held a note of something that sounded almost like genuine warmth. The senator was exactly what central casting would order for a corrupt politician. Silver hair, expensive suit, smile that never reached his eyes. But it was the way he looked at her that made Natasha's skin crawl. "Mrs. Blackwater, your reputation precedes you." His handshake lingered too long. "I understand you're quite the artist. I paint, yes, how refreshing. Okay. A woman with actual talents beyond shopping and looking pretty." Morrison's laugh was like fingernails on glass. Jonathan always did have exquisite taste. The comment made her feel like a piece of art he'd purchased for his collection. Jonathan's hand tightened on her waist, and she wondered if he felt her tension or if he was annoyed by Morrison's crude observations. "If you'll excuse us, Senator, I promised Natasha a dance." As they moved on to the dance floor, Natasha felt herself relaxing into Jonathan's arms. This part had become easy, natural, the way they moved together, the way he guided her through the steps with effortless confidence. "You handled Morrison well," he murmured near her ear. "He's not used to women who think for themselves." "Is that what I'm doing? Thinking for myself?" Jonathan's gray eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw something vulnerable there. "More than you know." The music swelled around them, and Natasha let herself pretend. Pretend this was real, that the man holding her was her actual husband, that the way her heart hammered against her ribs, it meant something beyond a biological response to proximity and pheromones. When the song ended, Jonathan didn't immediately step away. His hand remained on her waist, his thumb tracing a small circle against the silk of her dress. "Natasha, I, Jonathan." A woman's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "My God, I thought that was you." The woman approaching them was everything. Natasha wasn't. It's tall, blonde, stunning in the way that only came from good genes and better surgeons. Her red dress probably cost more than most people's cars, and she wore it like armor. Victoria. Jonathan's voice went completely flat. His hand dropped from Natasha's waist, as if she'd burned him. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your wife?" Victoria's smile was sharp as a knife, though I suppose introductions are redundant. "Everyone in the city knows about your romantic whirlwind courtship." There was something in her tone, something that made warning bells go off in Natasha's head. "Victoria Sterling, meet my wife, Natasha." Jonathan's jaw was so tight she was surprised he could speak at all. Victoria extended a perfectly manicured hand, her smile never wavering. "Such a pleasure to meet the woman who finally tamed Jonathan Blackwater. Though I have to admit I was surprised by the speed of your romance. 3 dates and then marriage. How impulsive of you, Jonathan. So unlike your usual methodical approach to everything. 3 dates. Natasha felt the blood drain from her face. How could Victoria know about their restaurant meeting, the lawyer's office, the wedding, I'm sorry. How do you know, Jonathan? Natasha asked. Though part of her already knew, she didn't want to hear the answer. Victoria's laugh was like crystal breaking. Oh, darling, I'm his ex-wife. We were married for 5 years, divorced 3 years ago when I finally got tired of being married to a man incapable of love. The words hit Natasha like a physical blow. Ex-wife. 5 years. Jonathan had been married before, and he'd never mentioned it. Not once in 3 months of living together had he spoken about a previous marriage. She turned to look at him, searching his face for some explanation, some reason why he would keep something so important from her. But his expression was stone. Giving nothing away? Jonathan. Her voice sounded small, even to her own ears. We should go, he said quietly, his hand finding her elbow. The dinner is ending. But Victoria wasn't finished. You know, Natasha, you should ask your husband about the real reason he needs a wife so desperately. It has nothing to do with his board of directors. Victoria, that's enough. Jonathan's voice was dangerous now, the tone of a man who'd reached his limit. Ask him about his father's will, Victoria continued, her eyes glittering with malice. Ask him about the clause that requires him to be married by his 35th birthday or lose everything. Ask him how much time he has left before the empire crumbles. The world tilted sideways. Natasha felt like she was falling even though she was standing perfectly still. The contract, the rushed timeline, the way he'd found her just when she was most desperate. It had never been about his board or his public image. It had been about money. About keeping his inheritance? About using her desperation to solve his own problems? Is it true? She whispered, looking at Jonathan with eyes that felt too wide. It was too vulnerable. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Yes. The single word shattered whatever fragile thing had been growing between them. Here Natasha felt herself breaking apart, piece by piece, in the middle of a ballroom full of people who were pretending not to watch the drama unfold. Excuse me, she managed, turning away from both of them. She walked toward the exit with as much dignity as she could muster, her emerald dress rustling like fallen leaves. Behind her, she could hear Jonathan calling her name, but she didn't turn around. Outside, the night air was cold against her heated skin. She stood on the hotel steps, breathing hard, trying to process the magnitude of his deception. Everything had been a lie. The careful way he'd found her, the sob story about her father's impact on his life, the generous offer to help, all been calculated to manipulate her into solving his problem. Natasha. Jonathan's voice came from behind her. Let me explain. She turned to face him, and for the first time since she'd known him, she let him see her anger. All of it, burning bright and furious in her eyes. Explain what exactly? How you manipulated a desperate woman into saving your inheritance. How you lied to me for 3 months. How everything between us has been fake. Not everything. Voice cracked on the words. Not everything has been fake. How would I know the difference? Tears were streaming down her face now, ruining her perfect makeup. How would I know what's real when you've been lying since the day we met? Jonathan stepped closer, and she could see something breaking in his expression. Because this is real. Natasha, what's happening between us? It's the way I feel about you? That's the only honest thing in my life. Your feelings? She laughed, the sound bitter and broken. You don't have feelings, Jonathan. You have strategies. You have contingency. Plans. You have backup options when your primary investment doesn't work out. That's not what this is. Then what is it? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, not caring that she was probably smearing mascara. What am I to you, really? Jonathan was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, with something that might have been pain. You're everything I never thought I could have. Everything I don't deserve. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. For a moment, Natasha felt her anger waver, felt the pull of whatever had been growing between them, despite the lies and manipulation. But then she remembered Victoria's words, the satisfied gleam in her eyes as she'd destroyed what little trust existed between them. It doesn't matter, Natasha said quietly. Whatever this is, whatever you think you feel, it's built on lies. And I can't do this anymore. She turned and walked away, leaving Jonathan standing alone on the hotel steps with his inheritance and his empire and his perfectly empty life. Natasha spent the night in a hotel room that smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and broken dreams. She'd used Jonathan's credit card, a small act of rebellion that felt hollow even as she did it. By morning, her anger had crystallized into something harder, colder. Resolve. She returned to the penthouse to find Jonathan waiting in the living room, still wearing his tuxedo from the night before. His bow tie hung loose around his neck, his hair disheveled, his usually perfect appearance cracked around the edges. We need to talk, he said, rising from the couch as she entered. We don't. Natasha moved past him toward her room. I'm packing. The contract is void. Your father needs the treatment. The words stopped her cold. She turned slowly, her hand still on the doorframe. Don't you dare use my father against me. Not now. I'm not using him. I'm stating facts. Jonathan's voice was carefully controlled, but she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. The treatment is working. If you leave now, the payments stop. Then I'll find another way. There is no other way, and you know it. He stepped closer, and she could smell his cologne mixed with something else. Desperation. 3 months of treatments have cost over $200,000. No bank will loan you that money. No charity will cover experimental therapy. Natasha felt trapped, cornered by the truth of his words and the weight of her own desperation. So what are you suggesting? That I stay married to someone who's been lying to me since the day we met? Right. I'm suggesting that you let me tell you the whole truth, all of it, and then decide. Something in his voice made her pause. Not the calculated businessman voice she'd grown used to, but something raw and real. 5 minutes, she said finally. Then I'm gone. Jonathan nodded, relief flickering across his features. My father died when I was 12, heart attack. But before he died, he changed his will. He'd built his empire from nothing, and he was terrified that his children would waste it. Natasha remained standing, her arms crossed defensively. The inheritance comes with conditions. I had to graduate from college with honors, work for the company for 10 years, and be married by my 35th birthday. My father believed that. Marriage would make me stable, responsible. Give me something to fight for besides money. When is your 35th birthday, Jonathan? His jaw tightened. 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The timeline made sickening sense now. The rushed proposal, the quick wedding, the way he'd swooped into her life just when she was most vulnerable. So you found yourself a desperate woman with a dying father? Someone who'd agree to anything to save him?
Yes.
The simple admission hit harder than any excuse would have. That's exactly what I did. I researched you, Natasha. I knew about your father's condition, your financial situation, your desperation. I used all of it. Natasha felt sick. Hearing him say it so plainly, so honestly, made it worse somehow. But that's not the whole truth, Jonathan continued, his voice growing softer. I chose you for practical reasons, but I stayed for ones I didn't expect. I fell in love with you. The words hung in the air between them like a confession and an accusation. Love, Natasha laughed bitterly. You don't know what that word means? I didn't. Not until I watched you paint at 3 a.m. because you couldn't sleep. Not until I saw you cry over a phone call with your father. Not until I realized that every moment I spent pretending to be your husband was the most honest I'd ever been with anyone. Natasha wanted to believe him. God, how desperately she wanted to believe that something real had grown between them. Despite the deception, but trust, once shattered, was nearly impossible to rebuild. It doesn't matter now, she said quietly. Even if that's true, even if you think you love me, I can't stay married to someone who sees me as a solution to a problem. Then don't. The words were so unexpected that Natasha was certain she'd misheard him. What? Jonathan moved to his desk and pulled out a manila folder. Divorce papers. I had them drawn up this morning. Natasha stared at the folder as if it contained a poisonous snake. I don't understand. Sign them. Walk away. Your father's treatment will continue regardless. I'll make sure of it. But your inheritance will be gone. Jonathan's smile was sad and strangely peaceful. $23 billion gone. The company my father built, gone. Everything I've worked for my entire life, gone. Natasha felt the world tilt sideways. You can't be serious. You'd give up everything for what? Pride? For you? The words were simple, devastating in their honesty. Because you deserve to choose freely, without desperation forcing your hand. Because your father deserves to live regardless of whether you can stomach being married to me. Because for the first time in my life, something matters more than money. Natasha sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Jonathan, you can't. It's too much. Not worth that kind of sacrifice. That's where you're wrong. Knelt beside her chair, his gray eyes intense and focused entirely. On her, you're worth everything, Natasha. You're worth more than my father's empire, more than all the money in the world. You taught me that. Tears were streaming down her face now, ugly and honest. I hate you for making me love you. I know. Jonathan reached up to brush a tear from her cheek, his touch gentle. I hate myself for the same reason. The admission broke something open inside her chest. All the anger, all the hurt, all the desperate love she'd been trying to deny came pouring out like water through a cracked dam. I do love you, she whispered. Despite everything, despite the lies and the manipulation, I love you, and that terrifies me. Then stay. Jonathan's. The voice was barely audible. Not because of the contract or your father or my inheritance. Stay because you want to try. Stay because you think there might be something real worth fighting for. Natasha looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the cold businessman who had propositioned her in a restaurant, but a man who had been so afraid of vulnerability that he'd built walls around his heart. A man who was offering to tear those walls down even if it cost him everything. What if we can't make it work? What if the foundation is too damaged and will fail honestly instead of succeeding with lies? It wasn't a promise of happily ever after. It wasn't a guarantee of anything except that they would try to build something real from the wreckage of their deception. But somehow, it was enough. Natasha reached for the divorce papers and slowly tore them in half. We're going to need new rules. Jonathan's smile was the first completely genuine expression she'd ever seen from him. Whatever you want. No more lies. Not ever. No more secrets. No more manipulation. No more using my father as leverage. Agreed. And if we're going to try this, we're going to try it for real. Not as a business arrangement, but as the people who are stupidly in love and trying to figure out if that's enough. More than enough, Jonathan said, rising to his feet and pulling her up with him. It's everything. When he kissed her this time, it wasn't for show or for witnesses, or for any reason except that they both needed it. It was desperate and honest, and full of the kind of hope that comes from choosing to trust someone despite having every reason not to. Outside, the city moved on with its endless dance of ambition and heartbreak. But inside the penthouse that had become their home, to people who had found each other in the most unlikely way, began the harder work of learning to love each other truly. 6 weeks later, Jonathan's 35th birthday came and went without fanfare. The inheritance disappeared, as promised, along with the empire his father had built. But Jonathan Blackwater, former billionaire, woke up that morning next to his wife, who had chosen to stay, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly wealthy. The end.